Henry the Young King, known to history as the Uncrowned King, was perhaps the most tragic figure of medieval royalty. Brilliant, beloved, and born to rule, yet he would die without ever truly wearing a crown. Though crowned as heir and recognized as king during his father's lifetime, Henry never wielded sovereign power, never ruled a kingdom, and never fulfilled the destiny that seemed so certain from birth. This is the story of a prince who had everything except the one thing that mattered most: time. Born in 1155 into the mighty Plantagenet dynasty, Henry was the eldest son of Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine, two of the most formidable rulers of the 12th century. From the moment of his birth, Henry was groomed not just to inherit a crown, but to surpass his father's already legendary reign. His education was extraordinary, even by royal standards. He mastered Latin, French, and English, studied military strategy under the finest knights of Europe, and learned statecraft from advisors who had shaped kingdoms. But more than education, Henry possessed something that couldn't be taught: natural charisma that drew men to follow him willingly into battle and made even hardened nobles speak of him with genuine affection. The medieval world watched with anticipation as this golden prince matured. His father Henry II ruled an empire that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees, controlling more territory than any English king before or since. Young Henry was meant to inherit not just England, but Normandy, Anjou, and vast holdings in France. The expectation was clear: he would be greater than his father, greater than any king who had come before. In 1170, at just 15 years old, Henry was crowned King of England in a magnificent ceremony at Westminster Abbey. This was unprecedented. Never before had an English king crowned his heir during his own lifetime. The message was unmistakable. Henry II was so confident in his son's abilities, so certain of his destiny, that he was willing to share royal authority immediately. Yet here began the cruel irony that would define Henry's entire existence. Though crowned king, he possessed no real power. His father retained control of all territories, all armies, all major decisions. Henry bore the title of king, but lived with the reality of a prince. The chronicler Gerald of Wales wrote that young Henry had the name of king, but not the power. This arrangement, intended to ensure smooth succession, instead created a prison of golden expectations. Henry commanded respect as a crowned king, attracted followers who believed in his potential, and inspired loyalty from knights across Europe. Yet he could not act upon any decision without his father's approval. The frustration was maddening for a young man of such evident capability. The situation grew more complex as Henry matured. His military skills became legendary during tournaments and minor campaigns. Knights spoke of his prowess with sword and lance, his tactical brilliance, and his ability to inspire men in battle. Lords across the Plantagenet domains began to look toward him as the future, creating an informal court that rivaled his father's in influence, if not in actual authority. Henry's charisma drew the greatest knights of the age to his service. William Marshal, arguably the greatest knight who ever lived, became his devoted follower and would later speak of Henry with reverence that bordered on worship. But charisma and military skill meant nothing without the power to use them effectively. As years passed, the relationship between father and son grew increasingly strained. Henry II, one of the most controlling rulers in medieval history, showed no inclination to surrender actual authority to his heir. The old king had spent decades building his empire and trusted no one, not even his own son, to maintain it. Every major decision still required the father's approval. Every military campaign needed permission. Every political alliance had to be sanctioned by a king who seemed determined to rule until his dying breath. The breaking point came in 1173 when Henry, now 18 and consumed by frustration, made the decision that would define the rest of his short life. Encouraged by his mother Eleanor of Aquitaine and supported by his younger brothers Richard and Geoffrey, Henry rebelled against his father in what became known as the Great Revolt. This was not mere family drama, but a continental war that would rage for over a year. Henry allied himself with Louis VII of France, his father's greatest enemy, and convinced numerous English and Norman barons to join his cause. The rebellion promised to reshape the political landscape of Western Europe. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed Henry might succeed. His forces won several early victories, and support for his cause spread across the Plantagenet territories. Knights flocked to his banners, seeing in the young king the promise of a new age. Cities opened their gates to him, and even his father's most trusted advisors began to waver in their loyalty. Henry commanded respect not through fear like his father, but through genuine affection and admiration. He represented hope for a different kind of kingship, one based on honor and nobility rather than merely efficiency and control. But Henry II had not built an empire by yielding to challenges, even from his own family. The old king's response was swift and merciless. Using every advantage of experience, established authority, and superior resources, Henry II systematically dismantled his son's rebellion. One by one, Henry's allies were defeated, captured, or bought off. The young king's forces melted away as reality set in. Blood ties meant nothing when kingdoms were at stake. The rebellion collapsed in 1174, and Henry found himself not just defeated, but humiliated. His father's victory was complete, but rather than execute his heir as many expected, Henry II chose a punishment far more subtle and perhaps more cruel. He forgave his son publicly, restored his titles and honors, but maintained the same restrictions on actual power that had caused the rebellion in the first place. Henry remained the crowned king who could not truly rule, but now everyone knew the consequences of challenging that arrangement. The years following the failed rebellion were marked by a strange melancholy that seemed to settle over the young king. Those who knew him spoke of a change in his demeanor, a loss of the bright optimism that had once defined him. He continued to excel in tournaments, maintained his popularity among knights and nobles, and carried out ceremonial duties with grace, but the spark of ambition had dimmed. Henry knew that his father, still vigorous in his 50s, might rule for decades more. The crown that had been placed on his head at 15 began to feel less like a promise and more like a mockery. In 1183, at the age of 28, Henry fell ill while campaigning in France. The exact nature of his illness remains debated by historians, but contemporary accounts describe fever, weakness, and rapid decline. Some suggest dysentery, others point to possible poisoning, but the truth may be simpler and more tragic. Perhaps the uncrowned king simply lacked the will to fight death as he had once fought his father's enemies. On June 11, 1183, Henry the young king died in a small town in France, never having ruled the kingdom that bore his name. His death sent shockwaves across medieval Europe. Kings and nobles who had watched his career with fascination mourned not just the loss of a promising ruler, but the death of an ideal. Henry had represented the possibility of a different kind of kingship, one that balanced power with honor, authority with compassion. His funeral drew knights from across Christendom, many weeping openly for the king who never was. William Marshal, devastated by his lord's death, carried Henry's cross to the Holy Land as a final act of service, honoring a promise made to a dying prince who would never see Jerusalem. The irony of Henry's legacy is profound. In death, he achieved the universal admiration that had eluded him in life. Medieval chroniclers wrote of him with reverence usually reserved for saints. Later historians would call him one of the great might-have-beens of English history. His younger brother Richard, who inherited the succession, would become famous as the Lionheart. But even Richard's legendary reputation never quite matched the romantic appeal of the brother who died too young. Henry the young king became a symbol of unfulfilled potential, of dreams deferred and destiny denied. Today, few remember the name of Henry the young king. Yet his story illuminates one of the fundamental tragedies of hereditary monarchy, the cruel gap between expectation and reality, between the promise of power and its actual possession. He was groomed for greatness, crowned for glory, and died with neither. In an age when kingship meant everything, Henry possessed the crown, but never the kingdom, the title, but never the throne. He remains history's most poignant reminder that sometimes the greatest tragedy is not failing to achieve greatness, but being denied the chance to try. He was the uncrowned king, and his legacy whispers of all the ways that fate can break even the most golden of princes. What do you think drove Henry to rebellion against his own father? Was it ambition, frustration, or something deeper? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this dive into medieval royal drama, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories from the age of knights and kings. Your like helps us bring these forgotten figures back to life.